To create the new place and to add it to a user, we have to go to our places controllers now, right here. First, we have to import our user model here, because as we want to interact with the user, well, we kind of have to establish this connection. So let's import the user here. And this is located in /models/user. So with that, we can use our user schema. Now we can go down to our create place constant right here. And this is where we have to change some things. One thing that will change is the data type of the creator field. Previously, it was a simple string. Now, since we'll establish a relation between places and users, it'll be a special type which MongoDB uses to manage IDs. Why is this the case? Because we now store a real MongoDB ID in this field, not any dummy string anymore. But generally, our created place constant is fine. Things change down here though, because instead of immediately saving the place, we have to check whether the user ID we provided exists already, because only we have a user created with the corresponding ID, we should be allowed to create a new place. For that, I'll create a new variable and name it user. And I'll again wrap the following code in a try-catch block. It's again the same logic we had before. So in case we have any general error, we should catch this. Therefore, we can actually get started with the catch block here and store it in a constant again, which is a new HTTP error here, stating that creating place failed. Please try again with a 500 error code, and I'll return next code here. So that's what we did before. So that's just some general error. But now the question is, what do we actually want to do with our user here? Well, user should be equal to user.findById creator. Because what we want to do right here is we want to access the creator property of our users and check whether the ID we have for our login user is already stored in here. So we want to check if the ID of the user is existing. That's the code we have right here. And as we are in an asynchronous task, we have to add a wait right here once again. So we want to check whether the ID of the logged in user is existing already. In case we have a general problem, we catch it right here. But in case our check is successful, so in case we can check the ID of the creators, well, then we just want to make sure that if the user is not existing, so if the user is not in our database, well, then again, we have an error stating that we could not find user for provided ID. Error code should be 404 here. Don't forget to return the error once again to stop our code execution. We could also console log the user here if we want to. That's optional though, but let's maybe add it here in our code. But if this user is existing, well, then we can do two things now. First, we can store or create that new document with our new place. And second, we can add the place ID to the corresponding user. To do this, we have to replace this code here or refactor this code here. The catch block is fine, but here, try, this is what we have to work on. To do that, we need to be able to kind of execute different or multiple operations which are not directly related to each other. And if one of these operations fails, so if either creating the place fails or if storing the ID of the place in our user document, so if one of these operations fails independently from each other, then we want to make sure to undo all operations. So basically to throw this error without changing anything in a document. So that's the important thing. We want to do two things, and only if both things succeed, we want to continue and we want to change our documents. To do that, we need to use transactions and sessions. The transaction simply does what I just said. The transaction allows you to perform multiple operations in isolation of each other and to undo these. And the transactions are basically built on so-called sessions. So to work with these transactions, we first have to start a session, then we can initiate the transaction, and once the transaction is successful, the session is finished and the transactions are committed. So with that, our place is created and the place ID is stored in our users document. Sounds a bit complicated again. Let's do it step by step now, and you'll see it's actually a quite straightforward process. What we first need is a new constant. Let's call it session maybe. This is basically our current session that starts when we want to create this new place. For that, we have to add a wait again. We are still in an asynchronous task here, and we have to refer to the start session method Mongoose provides. As I said, with the session here, we can now also start our transaction. So in our current session, we want to start the transaction, another method we can use here. And with that, we can now tell Mongoose what we want to do here. What we want to do here is we want to make sure that our created place should be saved, right? We want to save it in the database. And as an argument, we have to provide the session property and refer to our current session, so the session that is currently running. With that, we will create a new place and automatically create the unique ID for our place here. And saving, we learned that already, is of course an asynchronous task. Therefore, make sure to add a wait here. So this was part one. Now we stored the place. And now, with the place being created, we need to make sure that the place ID is also added to our user. For that, we can refer to our user here and now say user.places, right? We want to access our places property. And here we want to push, so to add basically the created place. Push here is not the standard push, which you can use on any JavaScript array, by the way. Instead, this is a method used by Mongoose, which kind of allows Mongoose to, behind the scene, establish the connection between the two models we are referring to here, so to say. Very important here, behind the scenes, MongoDB grabs the created place ID, that's an integrated Mongoose feature here, and adds it to the places field of the user. So it only adds the places ID. That's important at this stage. With that, we stored the place, we added the places ID to our user. What's missing now is, of course, another asynchronous task. We have to save our updated user now. And again, this updated user should again be part of our current session that we are referring to. And only once all these tasks are successful, so we could create the place, we could add the place ID, and we could save the user, well then we want to make sure that the session commits the transaction right here. Another asynchronous task, so don't forget to add a wait. And just to make this clear here, only at this point the changes are really saved in the database. If anything would have gone wrong in the tasks that are part of this session and transaction, all changes would have been rolled back automatically by MongoDB. And that's it actually. With that, we use the session and the transaction for all these tasks, and only if this is successful, then the place will be created and the user will be updated. And just to give you some examples when this error code could occur, either our database server is down or something related to that, or the database validation fails. So these are two cases when things could go wrong here. The response can't stay the way it is. There is one important thing we have to know though, because so far when we created a new user or a new place and we didn't have a collection, the collection was created automatically in MongoDB. For the transaction, this is different. Here, if we don't have an existing collection, so in our case, we want to create a new place. This means we have to create a places collection. You remember here, place.js, we have place. This means places without the capital P would be our collection name. So we have to create this collection manually now. Because if you go to our MongoDB database, you see we have the places database, that's the database name, but this database only contains one collection. Therefore, we have to hit the plus right here and now add the collection name places like this and press create. This makes sure our transaction is successful. As I said, this is only required if we don't have the collection created already. With that, let's go back to our code and make sure we save our places controllers, our place.js, and our user.js file. And of course that our development server is running. And if we now go to our database, to users, here we can now first delete our two existing users. Here and right there. To start this whole thing from scratch. Now let's go to Postman. Create a new post request here, /users/signup. To create a new user, we need the body raw data, and JSON. And now we need to provide our name. Let's say menu here. Then we have to provide our email, which could be test@test.com. And we need to provide our user password for the newly generated user here. Let's use testers again. With that, if we now hit send, we should see that the user is created. We see we have an empty array for the places as this new user doesn't have any places at the moment. And we see the ID right here. And if we now go back to our database and reload, we can also see that the user was created right there, also with the object ID here. Let's copy this ID because now we will create a new place. And here, as I said before, we have to copy and paste this user ID to allocate this place to a specific user. This will be changed in the authentication part. I repeat that, don't forget about that. It's just a dummy solution at this stage of the project. So back in Postman, we have to create another request, another post request to localhost 5000, but this time not users, but simply places. We need again the body and the raw and the JSON format here. And now, which properties do we need? We need the title again. And let's stick to the Empire State Building here. We need a description. Again, a very famous building. We need the address. I'll add it in a few seconds. Let me first copy paste our creator ID here. This one, so that's the ID of the user we just created. And now let me quickly grab the address of the Empire State Building. I'm again using Google Maps for that. Here we go. Creator, by the way, so missing the A here. Now the properties look fine. With that, if we hit send now, we get back an error, and I think I know why, to be honest. Because, well, we are using Mongoose here, right? And up here, we didn't import it to our file. Well, this can of course not work, so let's quickly add Mongoose here. Save this, and if we now go back to Postman and again hit send, I think this should work. Yeah, this looks good. Now we created this new place, so this is the place ID, and down here we also get back our creator ID. And if we now have a look at MongoDB once again, in our places collection, we can also see that the place was created successfully, also with the place ID and the creator ID. And if you now remember that A5 at the end, that's the ID of the place. And if we check now our users, we see we have the array right here. And if we click onto this array, you can see A5 at the end. This is the ID of our place. So this seems to work fine. Let's now see what happens if we enter a wrong user ID. For that, we can just change the 7 here to a 6, for example. And if we hit send, we get back, could not find user for provided ID. So this works fine. This means we can only create a new place now if the user ID is existing. And this was exactly the goal of this operation here. What is missing now though is of course the option to also delete a place. And if we delete the place, we kind of have the similar logic. So we want to delete the actual place and we want to delete the ID of this place in the document of the corresponding user. Let's implement this as a next step.